Good evening, everybody. It is the first week of March. Let's take a look at Forex. We'll start with pound New Zealand dollar. We finished down a little bit last week, but you can see we've been continuing to bounce up for most of the previous weeks. We're still forming our wedge here pretty much. So I don't have a fib on this chart, but currently I'm looking for longs. We've actually already started to have a move up off the 4-hour 200, which you can see we've bounced off of several other times. But potentially, if we get another move down, we could see a bounce off the 4-hour 200, the daily 55, or I will even take down to this midterm fib. As you can see, it's been support back here. The midterm fib there, basically WS1, is going to be a line in the sand for longs. If we break below there, I'm not going to touch the pair for the week, even though we do have the daily 200 down here, which isn't very likely to break on the first attempt. But those are the areas that I want to look at this week. All right, pound CAD. Right now we're moving a bit below the 4-hour 55. I'm still looking for longs on this pair off of the 4-hour Dynafibs. We may not see a move back down that far. We could fail to stay below the 55. The big thing to look out for with the longs is to break above 193.40 area. Pound dog, you can see that we've started to move up a little bit. I'd prefer another pullback down to around the 4-hour 55, which is going to be the 61.8% fib, or down to the bullish Dynafib, and then see a move up from there. Pound yen, we did make it a little bit higher last week. Still not too confident on any big moves on this pair, as we could see pound USD and USD JPY move in opposite directions potentially. If they do look like they're going to continue to move in the same direction this week, then pound yen could be a good choice for a trade. It looks like we're starting to see a bit more control with the 4-hour 55, so that would be the area I would look to long. We probably want confirmation back above 184. Pound USD starting to look a little bit more convincing that the trend is reversed. However, we still haven't spent a considerable amount of time above 155. So you can see that I have a fib on the short side here, which we are just a little bit under 78.6. You can see the longer term fib up here at 23.6. We did move about 70 pips above that last week and then came crashing back through it. So the question is really, will the daily 55 hold? Will we see a bounce off of that area? Potentially a spike down into this area, which lines up well with the 61.8 fib, only that's in the wrong direction. So anywhere between the bottom line and the daily 55, a spike down in there. If that doesn't hold, we could see a long off of this pair. And potentially we have this channel forming. So not real clear on this pair. We will have to wait and see what price tells us for the week before we ultimately determine direction. Euro New Zealand dollar, we had a nice move down last week, and it looks like the 50% fib will be a pretty good place to take a short. It looks like that'll coincide nicely with the 4-hour 55 as well. So hopefully we'll get a pullback up to that area and we can take a nice short for a large gain. EuroCAD, we seem to be making some headway now on the downward movement. So I'll look for a pullback. First area will be the weekly pivot, which is a little bit before the normal zone. We could see a pullback all the way to this convergence here. All the EMAs are pretty flat, so they're not as relevant, but that should be a pretty good area anywhere between the weekly pivot and the bearish Dynafib to look for signals to short. Euro versus the Australian dollar was a pretty nice short last week, and let's see if we can get the same thing this week. We've started to pull back pretty significantly. Haven't looked at news yet, so it's probably on some Australian news, but it looks like here again we have the 50% fib, and between the weekly pivot, this would be a pretty good area for support and resistance, and potentially off the 4-hour 55 we should see a reaction to short. Euro yen, we broke below 134 once again, but we still haven't made it below, or at least not for any substantial amount of time, 133.50 yet. You can see we're pulling back a little bit at the beginning of the week. I'll look for reasons to short anywhere between 134 and a quarter and about 134.50, which we should see the 4-hour 55 come down to about there in the next couple days. The Australian dollar versus the New Zealand dollar. You can see last week that the 4-hour Dynafibs provided a good support and resistance zone. See that we moved into them, bounced off the bearish Dynafib, bounced off the bullish Dynafib, and ultimately made a move short, which also coincided with a small break below the 4-hour 55. So I'd like to see pretty much the same thing this week. I don't know if we'll get a pullback that far, but there's plenty of other pairs to trade. And you can see that the 4-hour Dynafibs are also doing a nice job of splitting the 4-hour 200 and the 4-hour 55 basically right down the middle. So that makes for a pretty good area to see price reverse if we do get a pullback this week. AUD-CAD, even though we're moving down right now and it looks like we may potentially be breaking out of this mess, we could very easily see a move back up as we have WS2 to contend with, and I don't really think it's reliable to trade in between the bearish Dynafib and WS2, so big mess here. I won't be touching it for the week. AUD JPY, I've fibbed this one on the daily all the way back from January's high to February's low, and we've got a pretty big area to work with here. Depending on what happens the beginning of this week, we could see a short from 94. We could see another rejection of the 4-hour 200 for a short from there, or if we just continue on our way down, we can see a break below 93 with a pullback potentially up to 93.21 to retest the upside, and then any subsequent break back down should provide a nice short there. So several options with this pair, all of them on the short side. AUD USD, last week we had a big rejection off of the 4-hour 200, and so far it looks like we're continuing that this week. So I would like to see a pullback, doesn't have to be as big, and potentially up to the weekly pivot or 61.8 fib. They're pretty close together, but anywhere in that area, and then another signal to short that the downwards move is continuing, and that should line up to be a good trade. First target of WS1. The New Zealand dollar versus the CAD is essentially the opposite of Australian dollar versus New Zealand dollar, where I'll look for another rejection off of the 4-hour bullish Dynafib, which currently coincides with C1.8. If we do break through the Dynafibs, I'll be a little bit cautious to take a bounce off of the 4-hour 200. If we do make it all the way down there, don't take the first bounce off of that level, as we could come crashing through there. New Zealand dollar versus the yen. We seem to be holding above the EMAs fairly well. I've been looking for this to start moving short again. It hasn't quite happened yet. We did make a little bit of a new high last week to bounce off of the daily 200. So if we continue to move down, we could look for another bounce off of the daily 55 or even the 4-hour 55. That puts us right in line with the 50% fib. However, we do have 91 up here to contend with, which could be a pretty large area for shorts. So if we are going to continue our run back to the short side, look for that to happen around the 91 area. So if you do get into a long, that'd be my recommendation for take profit. New Zealand dollar versus the US dollar. This is another pair that I fibbed from January's high to February's low. So you can see we're right in the middle of the two now. We look for price to stay below the daily 55 with a potential break and pullback, and then short from the 4-hour 200 and 4-hour 55. USD CAD 124 was the area last week. We couldn't hold below it, and we bounced up. You can see we had another bounce off of 124.50 towards the end of the week. So I'll look for another retest of that area, or we could just continue our way up. We could get a real small push into the 4-hour 55 and then continue up. If that is the case, I will look for another bounce off of 125 to 125.21, where the weekly pivot is, for a move back up. USD JPY, I will look for another bounce between 119 and 118.50. I think it's a little bit more likely this week that we see the bounce off 119. If we do break below that area, be pretty careful. Make sure you definitely have good confirmation of the long, because if we do happen to break below 118, we could drop quite a bit. And Euro USD, if we move down a little bit more and then get a pullback, the weekly pivot looks like a pretty good place to take a short. If not, I will look for a short from 50% fib. And that is going to be it for me for the week. Happy trading, everybody. Good luck.